I've said before, DayZ is not a difficult game, but it can be, and despite this arguably being the most difficult map yet, you can still bypass most of its difficulty and set yourself up for a really good run. And here, I'm going to reveal everything like a flasher in a park. If you liked the video, please leave a like or a subscribe, it really helps me out. But without further ado, let's get into the video.
Put the 2 fingers. You want me to smell them?
Ah, crap, he's onto me. Okay, so we need to start with the absolute basics. On Sakhal, the cold is your biggest enemy, especially with food now draining faster if you're cold. So your first priority should be building a fire to get a double heat buff. This is easy to do because you now spawn in with a knife. Just cut 2 bark from a tree and then gather 3 sticks. Using the 2 sticks with 1 bark will give you a fire that burns long enough for you to be able to get your full buff. Then you just use the remaining bark and stick to make a hand drill kit and light the fire, and by doing this it gives you enough time to scavenge for warm clothing without risking hypothermia, which is now deadly in this patch. Clothing with better insulation will slow down the cold, but until you find those, keeping the heat buff is your best line of defense, giving you time to loot more freely. When looting, prioritize civilian houses and smaller buildings, especially along the coast. Clothing is your main goal early on. Find insulated jackets, pants and boots to help slow down the cold. At first, you're gonna need a lot more fires, but eventually this does become far and few. Just make sure to pick the highest insulation level possible every time. This is really the only criteria you need to focus on at this point. Storage capacity, for example, is really small all around the coast, especially with the nerfing, so you should just focus on getting warm and not worry about anything else at this stage. Damaged or wet clothing decreases the insulation, which can make you a lot colder and lose you your heat buff a lot quicker as well. So always look out for duct tape or maybe even a sewing kit. Since the cold in Sakhal is relentless, getting better gear should be your top priority. Even if you have a heat buff from fire, the moment you move inland or encounter colder weather, you'll start to feel the chill. So loot every house thoroughly and keep your eye out for decent clothing. Civilian houses are a lot more useful here than maps like Livonia or Chernarus, or at least they feel that way because they offer so many useful supplies. Oh, and if you're near a fire station, remember the fire uniform offers the best insulation, so having the pants and top from here is great. But one thing that's extremely important is you need to stick to the coast longer than you would on Chernarus. Unlike Chernarus, where players often rush inland as soon as they can, it's a good idea to stick around the coast longer because it has more to offer. The coastal towns here are more densely packed with houses and loot locations than you might expect, which is more reflective of the Livonian starting areas. Civilian houses near the shore are excellent spots to gather supplies. Everything from clothing, food, guns, armor and tools can be found here. And because of how the houses are designed and because it's so dense, you will always find enough before you have to travel. With a short amount of travel, you can find new towns and villages with fresh supplies, so don't feel pressured to rush inland before you're ready. Loot the coast, gather the essentials and only move deeper in the map when you've secured enough to survive the colder, harsher conditions of the interior. Sakhal has a lower loot flow inland, so maximizing what you can find on the coast early gives you a better shot at survival when you do decide to move further into the map. That's not to say the inland doesn't have lots of goodies, it does. However, you need to first get enough things to actually survive there. And when you're around the coast, you should probably avoid the infected. In the villages and small towns scattered across Sakhal, it's easy to run into infected early on. At this stage, it's best to avoid direct confrontations, but when the opportunity arises, use your starting knife to stealth kill them instead. This is because they do sometimes have food on them or useful items. Now, the food can either be warm or need to be defrosted by a fire, so just keep that in mind. The layout of these villages with narrow alleys and tight corners makes it easier to sneak around than in other maps, so avoiding groups of infected while picking them off one by one is a lot easier if you get the knack for it. Stealth kills with a knife are quiet and prevent you from attracting more infected or players who might be waiting nearby. Just crouch, stay low, and take your time. Sakhal is not a map to rush, so you need to take your time. However, when you get more used to it, you probably will end up rushing a lot of it and just run in line as quickly as possible, which is what all this stuff is actually meant to do. But let's move on to something that might surprise some people. Police and medical centers are much rarer on Sakhal compared to other maps, but they do exist. If you spot one, it's definitely worth checking out. They can provide you with valuable supplies like weapons, ammunition, and medical kits, as many people know. If there isn't one nearby, don't panic, that's probably going to be the case most times. Sakhal also has scattered police car events between cities where you can find some good guns, ammo and gear, and for medical supplies, okay, it's a bit trickier. Medicine is harder to come by, but if you've got the heat buff, you can avoid the most common issues you'll face on this map, which are mostly things like the cold and hypothermia. And also, don't eat snow, it will kill you quite quickly unless you treat it with chelating tablets. So it's not crucial to stockpile medicine immediately. Other than the likelihood of a cold setting in, which can be negated by the heat buff, it's pretty similar to the other maps. But one thing that definitely isn't similar to the other maps, Sakhal doesn't have wells in its towns and villages. Instead, you'll need to find springs for clean water. These springs are usually located at the end of their tracks, so keep an eye on for them as you explore. When you get used to spotting the trails they're at the bottom of, like this, you probably won't have any issues. Be sure to drink plenty when you find one, because clean water sources are more spread out here. Not knowing this early on can leave you dehydrated and desperately searching for a spring when you could have stocked up beforehand. Because of this scarcity, I recommend trying to keep as many cans on you as possible. But if you can't find food or water, there is a simple trick to this. Fishing is a simple way to get enough food to last, although the water is not as high as it used to be from fish. But enough fish will keep you going until you can find more. One of the biggest differences here is Sakhal has lots of stones on the dirt roads, so using one of these against the many rocks, you can create a stone knife instantly, which is easily disposable and useful for things like digging up worms or cutting up additional clothing for 12 rags to make a rope. Make sure to cut your fish, cook it, and then eat it when it's cooled down. Eating warm food is the best way to maintain your heat. Alternatively, make sure to search greenhouses for zucchinis and tomatoes. Oh, and keep in mind, although there's no fruit, mushrooms can spawn here. I find quite a few on the blackened coastline. And before you travel inland, there are two things I absolutely recommend. The first thing is creating and carrying a torch with you. This won't heat you as well as a fire, but it usually gives you enough heat to survive the cold when traveling. But keep in mind, to save space, carrying rags with you is enough too, because the hand drill kit and stick can be made easily on the go. Just make sure you have the knife I mentioned earlier, it's definitely important. And the next thing I recommend is this. When you travel, there are two main causes of death: the elements and the other players. And it's so important you can defend yourself by knowing how and where to find the best places for PvP gear. And to do that, just click here, where I tell you exactly where to look so you can set the course. Or for something else, click here. But as always, until next time.